Hey everybody, Trey here. Welcome back to another video. Severe weather is back in the forecast this weekend into early next week, particularly on Sunday and Monday, November 17th through 18th. The SPC has outlined slight risks, level 2 out of 5, for both of those days. This is your day 3 outlook for Sunday into early Monday. The slight risk is centered here in the yellow shaded region in the western half of Texas, including places like Fort Stockton, Midland, Odessa, over to Abilene, up to Wichita Falls, with a level 1 out of 5 marginal risk surrounding that. All hazards do appear to be on the table for this setup on Sunday, and that threat is expected to persist into Monday, November 18th, where the SPC has outlined a risk area across far southern Oklahoma into north and central Texas. That includes Wichita Falls, Lawton, Fort Sill, Oklahoma, down to the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex, Waco, and to the northern portions of the Austin Metro at this time. I would expect these risk areas to expand perhaps over the next couple of days as we get a little bit more clarity in the model data. But these outlines that you see here are not going to remain the same as the event approaches, but this is what we have for now. And so we're going to discuss a few things about this setup in this video. As we always do a couple days out from a setup, we'll take a look at what's currently going on in the atmosphere, and we'll take a look at our favorite models, comparing and contrasting them, and seeing if we can come up with some possible outcomes for this upcoming stretch of severe weather. So let's go ahead and get started here. Let's take a look first at what's going on right now in the atmosphere. This is the SPC mesoanalysis at 500 millibars. And right away, you see a couple of interesting features here. Right away, you see a ridge over the Central Plains that is in place right now. Big high pressure area that has led to some pretty nice weather the last couple of days across the Central Plains here in Oklahoma. Temperatures in the mid to upper 60s, well, with some sunshine, so beautiful day here. But that is going to change as we see this big old trough here centered over the western half of the country. Very high amplitude feature at this point with some strong flow that has rounded the base of this trough. Interesting evolution that's going to happen with this trough. We're going to show you some model data here in a second, but what's going to happen is you see this little shortwave right in here. This is our lead shortwave. This has already started to induce some low-level cyclogenesis here across the central high plains, and that is going to move off to the north pretty quickly. Not going to be any severe weather associated with it, it looks like, as we'll have a lack of moisture with this initial shortwave. But what this has done is, again, it has started to induce low-level cyclogenesis out here, and that is going to allow for a secondary wave behind this initial wave to take shape. And that surface low currently is going to start drawing the moisture northward into our region of interest, and that is going to kind of set the stage for severe weather in this scenario. If we didn't have this initial wave, we may be talking about a little bit of a concern over moisture return, perhaps the degree of moisture return for this upcoming setup. But because we have this initial wave moving through, inducing low-level cyclogenesis, that the winds in the low levels have already started to shift to more southerly or southeasterly to start pumping that moisture into our region of interest. Our last system really swept that moisture out into the Gulf of Mexico, so we've had very limited moisture across the southern plains at this point, but because we have this initial wave that is kind of our kicker wave, leading to a priming of the atmosphere ahead of this next wave that is coming here. You can't really see it at this point. It hasn't really developed yet. What's going to happen is this initial wave going to move off to the northeast, and a portion of this wave behind it is going to become cut off from the flow. So we're going to get a closed, cut-off low to develop out here across the southwestern U.S., and that is going to be our main wave initiating our severe weather potential for Sunday and Monday. Speaking of the surface, let's go down to the surface and you'll see what's going on as we talked about right now. The broad surface low here across the Intermountain West impinging upon the Central Plains. And that has led to a strengthening and backing of the low-level flow already across much of the plains. You see the tighter pressure gradient here across much of the plains. Those winds are out of the south or south-southeast, already starting to pump that moisture back into our region of interest for Sunday and Monday. Let's take a look at our current raw surface data here. Let me refresh it to get our most up-to-date map, and you can see what we were talking about here. Most of the moisture, you don't even really see a 60s dew point anywhere on this map. That is because all of the moisture that we had last week for our last system was swept out pretty significantly into the Gulf of Mexico by our latest cold front. So you see but mostly just 30s and 40s dew points across this region. Even the portions of southeast Texas that usually house our most robust moisture, only seeing 40s and low 50s dew points at this point. So we really are going to have to thank this kicker wave, this initial wave and surface low for allowing us those winds to really early on start backing out of the south. You see all this southerly flow across the plains. That is going to really start pushing that moisture northward back into Texas. The dew points here in the 60s, somewhere in the Gulf, that's going to start creeping in probably overnight tonight into tomorrow, and then we'll have moisture ready to go for our severe weather event Sunday into Monday. So moisture should not be an issue with this event because of this initial wave and the fact that the winds have already started to back and strengthen out of the south or southeast across the southern plains. All right, let's take a look at our model data here. As always, we're going to compare and contrast our three most notable models, the 12Z NAM, the 12Z GFS, and the 6Z Euro. I'm recording this video before the 12Z Euro is out, but we do have the 6Z Euro at our disposal. So we're going to compare and contrast these and see if we can come up with a set of outcomes that are possible for this upcoming stretch of severe weather. So let's go ahead and start with the NAM at 500 millibars. Here is our trough centered across the western U.S. That strong shortwave that is already starting to move through the desert southwest. Again, that is inducing that low-level cyclogenesis there. This wave going to move off to the northeast into the northern plains over the next few days. And you'll see what happens here. This belt of flow on the backside of this trough is going to start rounding the base of the trough, and that piece of energy will become cut off from the main jet stream. As you see here on late day Saturday, we start to see this trough develop. Our main jet stream is right in here, and our cutoff low has developed out here across the Baja California Peninsula and the desert southwest. This is going to be our main wave here for our severe weather threat on Sunday going into Monday. So you see that takes a fairly southerly path here. That's why our severe weather threat is relegated to mostly the southern plains. Much of the central into the northern plains not really going to experience any sort of forcing from this trough. All the forcing going to be down here across the southern plains. Notice one thing here. Here we are at 21Z. This is 3 p.m. Central Standard Time on Sunday. So the first day of our severe weather stretch here. And you see all the strong flow is still relegated well back here to the west across western Mexico into the desert southwest here, barely starting to impinge upon western Texas. So most of the forcing associated with this trough is lagging back pretty far to the west. And at this point, we are going to still be seeing that moisture starting to return amply off to the north. So the atmosphere may not be ready to go for storms quite yet by the peak daytime heating on Sunday. Most of the forcing is going to be relegated well back to the west, and it's going to start moving through by early to mid-evening here. You start to see these red colors, the stronger winds associated with this jet streak, starting to overspread much of West Texas. This is going to be at 9 p.m. Central Standard Time on Monday. So the forcing starts to arrive pretty late in the event. The timing of this trough not quite optimal for a daytime severe weather threat on Sunday, at least on the NAM here. We're going to show you the GFS and Euro in a second, but it looks to me like this is going to be more of an after dark and overnight event Sunday night into early Monday morning. So we'll back it up to 0Z here. This is going to be 6 p.m. Central Standard Time on Sunday evening. Your axis of the trough right in there. Nice negative tilt nature to the trough, but again, most of the forcing back in here across western Mexico, just starting to impinge upon West Texas. So this is the NAM. Let's take a look at the GFS. Similar progression here. That lead shortwave moves off into the northern plains. The cutoff low develops over the Baja California Peninsula. And here we are at 0Z on Sunday. Main jet streak back in here. Your axis of the trough somewhere across southern Arizona into western Mexico there. And if we compare this to the NAM, you see the NAM may be just ever so slightly back to the west, but overall a very similar scenario here between the NAM and GFS. That forcing still relegated well back to the west. We're starting to see a little bit of forcing overspread West Texas at this point by 6 p.m. on Sunday, excuse me. But again, most of the forcing going to come through in the nighttime to overnight hours. So it looks like the models are in a fairly good agreement here for late forcing and an overnight event Sunday into Monday. Let's take a look at the 6Z Euro here. Should show a fairly similar evolution here. The cutoff low develops across the desert southwest into the Baja California Peninsula. And here we are, 0Z Sunday, 0Z Monday, so 6 p.m. Sunday, jet streak here, well back to the west. Most of the forcing, well back to the west as well. Pretty much on par with what we're seeing with the other couple of models there. The NAM certainly, as is usually the case, a little bit less progressive than the GFS and the European model, but overall the progression here is the same among the models. So we're starting to see some much better model agreement that we have been seeing with the progression of this mid and upper level trough. We're going to stick to Sunday here. We'll take a look at Monday in a second here. So just for, let's go down to the surface and see how our low-level cyclone is going to progress. I'll go back to the surface on all these models, and we'll see how this lead surface cyclone that is developing as we speak and the new surface cyclone that is expected, how those are going to progress here. So this is the NAM, 12Z NAM. You see that nice cyclone there across the central high plains going into this evening. That is going to shift off to the east, northeast pretty quickly going into the day on Saturday. You'll start to see those temperatures warm across the plains. That southerly flow across the plains, again, going to start pumping that moisture northward into our area of interest. But again, this surface low, this lead surface low, not going to be of any direct impact to our severe weather event on Sunday. But we will start to see, as this trough starts to swing through the higher terrain here of western Mexico into the southern Rockies, we will start to see low-level cyclogenesis here sometime late Sunday. But you see it is somewhat late here. You start to see the surface low develop across western Mexico. This is at 0Z, so 6 p.m. Sunday. This is a fairly late initiation of surface cyclogenesis here. You see for most of the day on Sunday, not much going on in the low levels here, but we do start to see surface cyclogenesis by the evening on Sunday right there in western Mexico, and that should start to swing through into the southern high plains late in the period on Monday morning. Your surface low right there in eastern New Mexico, really tight surface low given a very strong, compact, negatively tilted trough. Not surprising that we're seeing very robust low-level cyclogenesis here. And then it will continue to move off to the northeast going into the day on Monday. So this is going to be, so that was the NAM here. Let's take a look at the GFS. GFS, much of the same. That lead surface low moves off into the northern plains in Canada. We start to see surface cyclogenesis sometime, at least really robust cyclogenesis sometime on Sunday. This is a little bit better here. You see the pressure gradient starting to tighten in western Mexico there by Sunday afternoon. So a little bit of a quicker solution here with the GFS versus the NAM. But overall, the idea is much of the same. By late in the period, we see the surface low here somewhere in West Texas, a little bit off to the east of where the NAM had it. This is at 9Z Monday morning. So that is going to be 3 a.m. Central Standard Time Monday. Your surface low on the NAM centered somewhere here in eastern New Mexico, with the GFS out here off to the east a little bit in West Texas. Not too much of a concern there, not too much of a really significant difference in the overall setup. Going to be the same, just maybe the area that is going to be under the gun, especially with western extent, might be slightly different based on which of these solutions comes to fruition. But we do have a nice, robust cold front here, very well-defined pressure tongue stretching down to the south from that surface low on both of these models. Warm front stretching off to the northeast through Oklahoma. So that is going to define the northern extent of any severe threat here going into the morning hours on Monday. Broad warm sector here across Texas, so we will have to watch for that line of storms along the cold front, as well as perhaps any development out here in the open warm sector. We saw what can happen in the overnight hours of November 3rd with our latest event out there in central Oklahoma. We had that localized outbreak when multiple supercells developed out in the open warm sector ahead of the line. It was a little bit of a surprise, not really very well modeled. So that's always something you have to keep in mind with these highly dynamic events with broad warm sectors here. Taking a look at the European model, let's see how it handles the surface low here. Northern Plains surface low moves off on Sunday. We start to see cyclogenesis there into far west Texas, western Mexico by early evening on Sunday. So very similar progression here by 9Z. Very similar solution to the GFS. That surface cyclone is centered somewhere there in the Texas South Plains region. The NAM certainly a little bit farther back to the west. So the NAM is definitely the slowest solution of the two, but the GFS and the European model pretty spot on with the location and progression of this surface low. Let's take a look at moisture here. We'll talk about how that moisture is going to progress. Once again, those surface winds have already started to shift out of the south, which is going to start priming the atmosphere, getting that moisture return to start fairly early in the forecast process here. So we're not going to have too much of a concern with robust moisture return in this particular setup. which is something you always have to take account of here this time of year because we have so many more robust cold frontal passages sweeping that moisture into the Gulf. That's always a concern with these events, but with this particular setup, does not look to be an issue. And you'll see why here. That surface low, that initial surface low, already starting to get those winds out of the south. So you'll already start to see moisture return this evening. Start to see those 50s dew points start to creep back into West Texas here. Those 60s start to creep back into South Texas. So moisture return already well underway. By Saturday evening, we have 60s dew points still there in South Texas, broad 50s dew points up into Kansas, Oklahoma, much of Texas there on the NAM model here. And then going into Sunday, we'll have robust moisture return as that secondary surface low develops here in western Mexico to West Texas. We will start to see more robust moisture return, especially as that surface low strengthens overnight. You see those 60s dew points here by early evening up to the Red River, basically, down to the south into the Midland, Odessa area, over toward the Fort Stockton region there. So we will have plenty of moisture in place. That moisture will continue to shift off to the west and north going into the overnight hours, and then you see by Monday morning that surface cyclone that really starts to push off to the east. That cold front starts to take shape there and really starts to push things off to the east going into Monday. We'll show Monday here more in just a second, but surface low somewhere in here. You see the moisture feeding back up into it in eastern New Mexico with your cold front back in here, warm front in this region there. Again, fairly broad warm sector. May be dealing with a little bit of a lower instability setup here. You see these red contours. That's your lifted index, and that is a measure of instability. The more negative your lifted index is, the more unstable your atmosphere is. So where these red contours are, the model is depicting an unstable environment, at least in the mid and upper levels of the atmosphere. And you see here, not a lot of red contours the farther north and west you go there near the cold front. So we may be dealing with a little bit of a lack of instability here, especially with northern extent. So that could be something to watch here into the overnight hours on Sunday into Monday. So that is going to be the NAM. Let's take a look at the moisture return on the GFS. GFS, much of the same here. By tomorrow evening, we have broad 50s dew points across Kansas into Oklahoma, much of Texas. Those 60s dew points still relegated to the southeast Texas coast, but we see rapid moisture advection here through the day on Sunday. And then by early evening on Sunday, a little bit of a messy moisture regime here, not quite as defined as what the NAM was showing here. Your warm sector is kind of well off to the east here. Your best dew points well off to the east here, which is unusual. This is going to be 6 p.m. on Sunday. We'll back it up here on the NAM. You see the 60s dew points much farther west moisture return here with the 60s dew points compared to the GFS. The NAM has those 60s all the way over to the kind of Fort Stockton to Midland, Odessa area. And then on the GFS, we see not quite the case here. More northward advance of those 60s dew points into far southern Kansas, and perhaps a more robust northward advance of mid to upper 60s dew points here, almost reaching the Red River, compared to the NAM, which by this point barely had 60s dew points reaching the Red River at all, with your more robust moisture still down here in southeast Texas. So we do have some pretty significant differences in the moisture return and the timing of the moisture return here, at least early in the event, which would be early Sunday evening. So that will have some potential impacts on the overall environment. We should be able to destabilize going into the, as we progress into the evening, even if this NAM solution were to come to fruition. That would be something that would change. We should start to see more robust moisture return as we go later into the period, and more destabilization with time. But the GFS certainly a little bit more aggressive with the northward advance of moisture, maybe not so much with the westward advance of moisture near that surface low. So that is something interesting to note here. We should have plenty of moisture, period. Just where that moisture is and how quickly it advects off to the west and north is going to be a dictating factor in when the most robust storms will be able to get going. Then we'll go a little bit forward here. Those mid to upper 60s dew points do make their way off to the west nicely. Then the cold front starts to come through by early Monday morning here. And you see we have an unstable environment all the way up into central Oklahoma. So areas up here into southern Oklahoma, if this GFS solution comes to fruition, may need to be on alert for perhaps some severe weather stretching up there. Again, the outlook at this point just has a low level 1 out of 5 risk up here. Perhaps this is because of that uncertainty and the discrepancy in the moisture return among the models, with the slight risk down here in Texas where the most robust moisture is expected to be. But we'll have to keep that in mind here going into the overnight hours on Sunday into Monday. This is at the same time on the NAM. you see here a little bit different picture there with more robust moisture return on the GFS. So something to keep in mind there. We'll see what the European model has. Interested to see whose side it takes. I would suspect it's a little bit closer to the GFS because its low-level cyclone progression was very much closer to the GFS than it was the NAM. So here's the European model, very similar to the GFS. We do have more 60s dew points out here across West Texas. But overall, we do have a similar solution where we have the best moisture fairly far north into southern Oklahoma here, but off to the east a little bit. And that's going to be well removed from the main forcing. Again, this is at 6 p.m. Sunday, so our forcing still well back in here across, just creeping into West Texas at this point. So that's not going to be really much of anything here. We may, if we have any little bit of warm advection here across this area, a little bit of confluence bands, that could be enough to initiate a few thunderstorms with perhaps a severe threat there in this portion of the warm sector across the eastern half of Texas among these, the GFS and the European solution. But there's not a whole lot of synoptic scale forcing to support and allow storms to persist there in that regime. So, but then as the forcing moves in, you see the European model, those dew points do start to creep off to the west a little bit. Cold front takes shape by late Monday. This is 3 a.m. Monday, and so that would mean a robust severe threat getting underway, probably very, very late in the period. Your moisture return finally has kind of settled in here. Your moisture pattern is settled in. Your frontal zones nice, and that surface low ejecting off to the northeast. Your frontal zones well depicted now on the models at this point. So that would mean your severe threat probably starts to really get underway at this time, which would be very, very late Sunday at the earliest, early Monday morning. So this definitely looks to be an after dark event going into the morning hours on Monday. Across this area, but we do have robust moisture again, lots of forcing along the cold front and the with the strong compact trough coming in. So we'll have storms along the cold front, and perhaps we'll have to watch out here in the open warm sector for any development out in here going into Monday morning. A lot of forcing is expected here with this setup. Before we take a look at some soundings here, we'll look at the forcing. So your boundaries here, your cold front going to set up somewhere like this. Very strong, very progressive low-level cyclone here. So very progressive cold front, fast-moving cold front, very strong forcing aloft with this 500 millibar trough. That is going to lead to a lot of storms. So this is going to be, I think, a fairly quick transition to align with this particular setup. Again, let's take a look. Let's take a look on the GFS here. A little bit better depiction of our initiating boundaries. So your cold front in there, warm frontal zone somewhere in here probably. So let's take a look at our shear vectors with respect to those initiating boundaries. And you see here, along with the strong forcing, fairly parallel shear vectors to your cold front here, and especially your warm front as well. So that is going to lead all these factors in play. Very strong forcing in the mid and upper levels, strong frontal forcing here from the cold front, and those shear vectors very much parallel to the initiating boundary. That is going to allow for a very quick transition to a linear mode along the main initiating boundaries, the cold front and perhaps the warm front up here into southern and central Oklahoma perhaps. Out in the open warm sector, again, it is somewhat of a broad warm sector. Perhaps the instability is not all that wide, even though we do have a broad swath of 60s and 70s dew points here across the eastern half or 2/3 of Texas. So we'll have to keep that in mind, but the instability wanes with eastward extent. So that may not be enough real estate for a lot of prefrontal stuff to develop, but we'll have to keep that. Always have to watch that with these dynamic setups and warm sectors with any breadth to them at all. If there's any room at all, prefrontal supercells could be a possibility if we get some confluence bands out here ahead of the cold front. One thing that may squash that as well, the progressive nature of the cold front overall is going to be sweeping very quickly off to the east, really kind of pinching off that warm sector with time into Monday morning. So that may lead to a decrease in the potential for a long-lived prefrontal activity, but it is something we'll have to watch. So let's take a look at some soundings here from across the region here. I'll start early on in the setup here. So this is going to be 0Z, or maybe 3Z here, right across West Texas near that surface low. And you'll see that we don't really have all that much instability. Very, very limited instability at this point. The kinematics really starting to increase with strong deep layer shear, very lengthy photographs here, 0 to 6 kilometer shear, almost 80 knots there with some strong low-level curvature. So our kinematics certainly favorable for severe weather, but our instability very, very weak at this point across the West Texas corridor. Let's take a look at the GFS here. Similar spot out here across West Texas as the surface low starts to develop. and you'll see probably a similar solution. Kinematics very, very strong, but our instability just is not there at this point. So storms, robust storms, will probably hold off here going into the late evening to early morning hours on Monday, especially with these concerns. So we'll take the sounding here at 3Z. I'll take a sounding in the warm sector just to see where we have some instability, and then out here to the west along our cold frontal zone. And so this is why the warm sector needs to be watched. Again, the instability is still very, very skinny out here in the warm sector. We do have a little bit more, 400 joules per kilogram mixed layer CAPE, so a very low instability event, but our kinematics are certainly quite strong here. Strong speed shear in the low levels of the hodograph, some curvature there, and very, very long hodographs, bulk shear over 50 knots there. So very strong kinematics here. Our instability is still struggling a little bit. This is at 3 a.m. Central Standard Time on the NAM there for Central Texas. And then back out to the west, again, instability very, very weak. Is that enough to support severe weather? With these kinematics, it might be just enough, but this may tend to be more of a low-topped line. You see 80 knots, 81 knots of 0 to 6 kilometers shear there. That is very, very impressive. Strong curvature in the low levels of the hodograph. So it's all going to depend on the instability in this setup. Again, this is at 3 a.m. Central Standard Time in West Texas here now. So that's when the surface level will start to eject off to the northeast, and we'll start to see that moisture really creep its way off to the west ahead of the developing cold front. If we have enough instability here, that may support some low top, maybe a low topped line of storms. Again, quick transition to a squall line with some embedded spin ups here. Might not be a lot of lightning within this line, given that we have such a lack of instability. Large hail probably not going to be a threat as well. Mostly going to be some damaging winds and some spin-up tornadoes embedded in the line, given this much low-level and deep layer shear. So that's the NAM at 3 a.m. Let's go ahead and take a look at the GFS here at 3 a.m. So the GFS certainly looks a little bit more potent for a robust severe weather threat. More instability here along the cold frontal zone by this time. So we'll take a sounding here right in the Abilene area. Then we'll take one up here in southern Oklahoma just to see. And then we'll take one maybe out here in the warm sector just a little bit toward the I-35 corridor. So this is going to be along the cold frontal zone right in that vicinity there. So the Abilene area, 3 a.m. Central Standard Time. Again, very skinny instability here. Not all that favorable for robust severe weather, but it might just be enough. 450 joules per kilogram mixed layer CAPE there with this kind of a profile certainly would favor a low-topped, strongly forced squall line with a damaging wind and spin-up tornado risk there. Lots of low-level shear. Effective storm relative felicity approaching 400 meters squared per second squared could be favorable for a tornado threat along the line. Our low-level shear vectors associated with relative to the initiating boundary, your cold front draped like this, your shear vectors in the lowest couple of kilometers here of the atmosphere. It's what we look for to really pin down a QLCS tornado threat. Your 0 to 3 kilometer vectors here, 189 degrees, so something like this. We like to see them a little bit more perpendicular to the initiating boundary, to the line itself, to have more of a QLCS tornado threat. So that may be a negative factor with respect to the tornado risk with this line, but we do have very strong low-level shear, so we could see a few spin-ups along the line there as it moves off to the east going into Monday morning. Here's southern Oklahoma. We will have to pay attention here. A little bit of instability, 400 joules per kilogram mixed layer CAPE might be, again, just enough, with still strong kinematics, strong low-level shear, strong deep layer shear. So we will have to watch southern Oklahoma. If the GFS and European solutions come to fruition, that could be a risk, a situation where the risk is extended into southern Oklahoma. The slight risk is extended into southern Oklahoma, but right now, not enough confidence to make that determination at this point. Open warm sector does look to be fairly poor in the thermodynamic department, would not really be able to support robust convective development in the open warm sector there. So that is a good thing, especially with these kinematics in place. So the warm sector does not look all that favorable to support robust and persistent supercells out here. I think we're going to have most of our activity mainly here along the cold frontal and warm frontal zones here. Mostly the cold front here across West Texas. That should be a quick transition to a squall line by the earliest Sunday night, but mostly going on through Monday morning. So that is going to be what we have for Sunday into Monday morning. Let's see how the threat persists into Monday here. The trough really starts to push off to the northeast. You'll see here as we start from 0Z Monday, so the evening Sunday. Nice negative tilt compact trough here moves its way across the southern plains. This is at 18Z, very strong jet streak here associated with this this compact trough. Lots and lots of forcing here, going to allow these storms to persist perhaps into the daytime hours on Monday. But the problem here is our instability. I'll show you the GFS before we take a look at our instability here. Just looking at the overall trough progression, much of the same on the GFS by 18Z. On the GFS, it's right in there. NAM is a little bit farther back to the west, but overall the same kind of solution there. And the European model, I would suspect, is a little bit in line with the GFS. And there it is, 18Z Monday. European model actually is the most progressive of these, with the center here all the way up in the northwest Kansas, or northwest Oklahoma, southwest Kansas border region, a little bit farther north of the GFS, which is a little bit farther to the east of the NAM. So NAM certainly is the least progressive solution here, but overall the idea is the same: compact trough with a strong jet streak here, moving through the southern plains by midday on Monday, going to allow that line to probably persist into much of Monday morning, into the early afternoon on Monday. The problem here, though, is instability on Monday. And I'll back this up here, zoom back into our southern plains sector. So this is the NAM. Again, was a little bit of an outlier here compared to the other two models on moisture return. The most robust moisture on the other two models was all the way up to the Red River here earlier on than with the NAM. But you see here that warm sector really gets pinched, especially with northward extent, as that surface low ejects off to the northeast into parts of the northwest Oklahoma and Kansas right here. This is at 18Z Monday, your surface low all the way up here into right on the Texas-Oklahoma border there in northwest Oklahoma. But your warm sector really pinched off here, your most robust dew points, not a very broad east-west extent there. So that would be a little bit of a concern, a little bit of a good thing for central and southern Oklahoma, not allowing the line to really persist in a robust state up here. We do have the surface low and our very robust boundaries feeding up into the surface low. Cold front up in here, your surface low somewhere back in here. Nice moisture tongue feeding back into the surface low. Colder air aloft associated with this trough moving in. So this is starting to ring some bells for a potential little cold core type setup up here. So your surface low by 21Z 3 p.m. Monday, somewhere up there in southwest Kansas near the Pratt or Greensburg area. And then your 500 millibar low centered very close to that. That is a classic sign for cold core type setups. Some colder air aloft as well with this trough, no doubt. You see those grays there starting to overspread the region. That is colder air in excess of negative 20 degrees Celsius there in that area. That's very cold air aloft. So you have cold air aloft with a mid and upper level cyclone center in very close proximity to a surface low center. That starts to ring some bells for a potential cold core type setup up here. Now, again, it is very strongly forced, so this may be more of a line up here in this area, but this area will have to be watched here. Southern Kansas into northwest Oklahoma, not in a risk area at the moment, but we could see a little bit of a cold core type setup up here, and that's why I said don't take this risk area with a grain of salt and think just because you're not in a risk area for Monday that you don't have to take any precautions. Up here in the northwest Oklahoma, southwest Kansas corridor may be an area where they add a risk outline here in subsequent outlooks, but right now not quite enough to put that in at the moment. But you do see here a little bit of instability. Let's take a sounding from up in here right along the surface low, and I bet we're going to see some pretty interesting soundings here. And there you go. This is a classic cold core type setup. Robust low-level instability here. All that instability here packed below 6 kilometers. That is going to be low-topped storms with a very robust low-level thermodynamic environment. 0 to 3 kilometer cape in excess of 260 joules per kilogram here. That is extremely high low-level instability. And we've talked about the importance of low-level instability ad nauseum on the channel before. If you have any surface vorticity, which you will ahead and near the surface low, any spin in the low levels will be able to very efficiently be stretched into the vertical by updrafts forming there to aid perhaps in tornadogenesis with these low top storms, if that is something that can come to fruition. So this area may be a sneaky little setup here. It may house a sneaky little setup here for Monday afternoon right along that surface low and frontal zone there in far southern Kansas to northwest and northern Oklahoma. So that'll have to be watched there. For the main area along the cold front here, again, that warm sector very much pinched there into eastern Oklahoma, with most of your instability relegated down here in Texas. We will have enough forcing here probably to sustain that line again going into the daytime hours on Monday. And down here along the cold front, we should have a robust environment still in place for parts of central and east Texas approaching the I-35 corridor here. So Dallas-Fort Worth southward toward Austin and Waco could be under the gun. This looks like a much better environment here on Monday. So definitely looks like something to watch on Monday, as the line will probably persist through much of the morning on Monday into the afternoon. We'll have a little bit more instability, upwards of 1,000 joules per kilogram mixed layer CAPE now. It is a little bit skinny, but that is a lot more CAPE than what we saw Sunday night into Monday morning. And then this profile here, certainly favorable for damaging winds and tornadoes within the line. Not enough real estate here, at least on the NAM, to support more of a prefrontal development, and that with the quick eastward progression of the cold front here, would not suspect that prefrontal development would be something to watch, but always in these setups we need to be at least keep that in mind. But looks like most of the activity going to be in the form of a line along the cold front with a damaging wind and tornado risk going into Monday afternoon. GFS probably will have a similar solution here. Let's go down to the Southern Plains sector again with our moisture. So here we go. GFS again going into Monday, late Monday morning, early afternoon, really pinches off that warm sector with northward extent to Oklahoma and North Texas. More robust down here across parts of southeast Texas, a little bit more progressive than the NAM, as we talked about. We do see this moisture feeding back in here to the surface low in northwest Oklahoma. Your surface low, a little bit more up here in Kansas, not quite as tight of a surface low as what the NAM was showing here, maybe a secondary center down in here. So we'll have to keep that in mind. But again, perhaps a little bit of a cold core type setup here with the mid-level cyclone center in close proximity to the surface low center, with a little bit of instability right along that little apex there going into the afternoon on Monday. And you see lots of low-level instability, very similar to what the NAM was showing. Lots of low-level instability here on Monday early afternoon. 600 joules per kilogram with strong 0 to 3 kilometer CAPE. Not quite as strong as the NAM, but GFS isn't usually as robust with instability as the NAM. But still, 75 or so joules per kilogram. 3 CAPE, still more than adequate for cold core type setups. Not much low-level shear, but again, surface vorticity can help overcome that, as it can be stretched into the vertical to aid in tornadogenesis with any supercells that develop. So that's going to do it for this video. That is going to be what we have right now. You see a little bit of model discrepancy still remaining, but overall the idea is going to be somewhat the same among the models. We are expecting that a severe threat will start to develop late Sunday night perhaps, but mostly into the overnight hours Monday morning across this area of west into central and northwest Texas. So Fort Stockton over to Midland, Odessa, Abilene up to Wichita Falls. In the level 2 out of 5, slight risk for now. Much of the day on Sunday will probably be free and clear of robust convection. And then again, starting in the overnight hours, late Sunday into early Monday morning, we will start to see storms increase in coverage out here across this area, especially within the yellow shaded region here, posing a risk for some damaging winds and a few tornadoes. Again, instability looks to be on the weak side, which will mitigate an overall greater risk. But we do still have perhaps just enough to support a low-topped, strongly forced squall line here, with the potential for a few spin-up tornadoes and some damaging wind gusts there. Given the strong forcing, the line will quickly move off to the east and persist into the morning hours and perhaps afternoon hours on Monday. And the SPC has that risk area there across far southern Oklahoma into north and central Texas, including Lawton, Fort Sill, down to Wichita Falls, Dallas-Fort Worth, Waco, and Austin. Again, most of the models really pinch off the instability up in here, the central Oklahoma to North Texas corridor, but that could change as we go here and approach Monday afternoon. But the instability does remain pretty robust down in here across the north central to central Texas corridor. So as the line moves off to the east and any additional development near that line will have that threat for some damaging winds and a few tornadoes there as well. And then we'll have to watch this area of northwest Kansas, northwest Oklahoma, southwest Kansas, eastward along the Kansas-Oklahoma border, perhaps a little bit farther north as well, depending on where that surface low ends up setting up. But somewhere in this vicinity here, we'll have to watch for a secondary area for some cold core type severe weather potential, low-topped storms possible, with a chance for maybe some isolated large hail, damaging winds, and maybe a couple of tornadoes there. But that is a conditional risk at this point, but something we'll have to monitor there over the next couple of days. So that's what we have going on for now. This event does not look as long-lasting and significant as our latest multi-day stretch of severe weather to start November, but it does look significant nonetheless, and we probably will see some robust storms for a good portion of the southern plains here from Sunday night through the day on Monday. So keep those weather radios handy. Have multiple sources of weather information if you live in these areas, and we will be able to get through this event just fine. I'll be back if the setups warrant here over the next couple of days with additional videos and posts on the social media pages, so stay tuned to those for updated information. But for now, that's going to do it for this video. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.